that'd be great. There we go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Tom Boynton from Coos Chapel. We're next door to the library. We're fortunate we get to share a parking lot with them. So when they have events, they use ours, and when we have services, we use theirs. Also the Catholic Church. We also have the North Bend Chapel in North Bend, and Sunset Memorial Park Cemetery south of town, and Ocean View Memory Gardens towards the ocean on Ocean Boulevard. With me today is my coworker Roger Vogelpol. He specializes at the cemeteries, and then also our friend Trevor Hefner from the Church of God in North Bend. He helps us as a chaplain sometimes when people don't have a minister they're familiar with for a service. So thanks, you guys. We also have the Ocean View Memory Gardens crematory. We have the only crematory here in town, and we have a pet crematory, separate pet crematory. So we help with people and pets. And we're all pet people at the funeral home. Lots of people are. So our businesses, our records go back to about 1913. There were funeral homes in Marshfield prior to that, but somehow those records over time disappeared. But we do have records from 1913. The cemetery at Sunset started in 1914. It was the Oddfellows. When the Marshfield Cemetery filled up, they moved out south of town. And then the North Bend Chapel was started in 1913 as well. And Ocean View Memory Gardens was 1939. So today we're just going to talk about pre-planning your funeral, the importance of that. The topic of death is difficult. We plan for all the important events in our life: births, baptisms, birthdays, graduations, weddings, anniversaries. So why wouldn't we plan for the ultimate event, our death? If we don't do it ourselves, someone else has to. We see that every day. When you pre-plan, you would want to make the choice of either burial in a casket at the cemetery, cremation. You may or may not have a ceremony, a memorial service, or a service at the church or graveside. There's also body donation, which is available. Some people choose to donate to science or be an organ donor. Those are all available. When we pre-arrange, we create an emergency file at the funeral home. There's no obligation to prepay. However, people can prepay, and what that does is secures the price today versus tomorrow. So basically, we guarantee what you pay today will not increase at the time of your death, with the exception of add-on things. And we use an insurance policy to fund the prearranged funerals. What that does makes it transferable, so if you ever move, you can take that with you. It's always your money, it's secure, you can borrow against it, cancel it. We don't recommend that, but all those are available and a benefit of the insurance. Some people, when their health declines, they need to secure assistance from the state for their care, and that's called Medicaid. And the Medicaid plan allows you to prepay your funeral expenses prior to going on assistance and prior to your death. So we help with that frequently, sadly. We also help notify Social Security. We help with veterans benefits for the veteran. As a veteran, you're eligible to be placed in a national cemetery for the veteran and spouse. Our 3 veteran cemeteries are Roseburg, Eagle Point down by Medford, and Portland Willamette National. You could be buried in any national cemetery if you're a veteran, so out of state is possible as well. You're also entitled to a flag. The veteran is entitled to a flag, a government headstone, which can be used in the national cemetery or a private cemetery. The national cemetery also reserves a spot for a spouse if they choose to be with their spouse later. One thing you want to consider if and when you prearrange your plans, there's things that we run into. Families have problems with passwords for computers. Sometimes one of the spouse has the passwords or does all of the book work. That's pretty common. Bank accounts, auto deposits and withdrawals, credit cards, online shopping accounts, safety deposit box. That's a problem because the bank will lock the safety deposit box and will not open it unless you're a signer on the account. And sometimes the key gets lost. That's important. Keys, property, insurance beneficiaries, sometimes those don't get updated. Vehicles, DMV, affidavit of inheritance. Those are all things to consider. And many of those things are in the handout that we have for you today. And those of you that will be watching online, thank you. If you would like a packet, you're welcome to call the Coos Bay Chapel, and we can mail one to you, or you can stop by. So this packet is designed for two people, a couple, and it just walks through everything that you might think of or need in pre-planning a funeral. It talks about insurance, bank accounts, some of the things I already talked about, will, veterans, Social Security. So it's a pretty good handout, and this is designed for you to keep at home for your family in the event of an emergency. If you choose, we can make a copy and keep one at the funeral home, which we call an emergency file. And then the third part to that is if you choose to prepay, you could do that also. Any questions so far?
I have a question, actually, about
Yes.
the box, or what's it called now?
Oh, caskets or urns?
The,
Safety deposit.
safety deposit.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
So if you're an executor, can you get that? If you're not a signer, I mean, how do you know? I mean, this may be outside of your.
I'm not certain on that, so
Okay.
I won't answer yes or no, but the times that we've come into a problem is where, like, I opened a safety deposit box and it's my name only and I have the key, and I put all my important papers in there, which is a good idea of sorts, but not really, because then your family might not have access to them. So it's good just to have a second person, whoever that might be, on the card, and maybe a second key. Because sadly that's sometimes where people put their will, birth certificates, Social Security card, just those important papers that they might need.
Sure.
And not have access to. She asked about boxes, and I thought caskets or urns. So with burial, we obviously sell caskets, and with cremation, we have urns available. There's lots of things for cremation that have come out. They make jewelry and small urns to divide up ashes. We do that frequently, where several members of the family would like a portion of ashes. So whatever we can do to help you. A lot of people choose to scatter ashes, and in Oregon that's completely allowable. They don't acknowledge the ashes after the cremation. We call them cremated remains, but ashes is common. So pretty much in Oregon, if it's private property, you would want to get permission. You want to do it discreetly. I have a handout for that I did not bring, but if that ever comes up, it's a letter from the state that talks about scattering ashes. Some people will keep the urn until the second spouse passes away so they can be together. Some keep them indefinitely. So cremation has become more popular for several reasons. First of all, cost-wise, it's much less expensive to have cremation than burial. Plus the convenience of family being out of town, those types of things. And then the cremated remains could be divided or placed in different places. Thank you, question.
Approximately, what is the cost for cremation?
Okay, so our simple cremation cost, which is without a service or a memorial, is $1,495. that we've had that price for about 9 years. It's based on our overhead costs of our business. Each funeral home is different based on their overhead. In larger towns, you will find cremation is less expensive. That's primarily because they're helping more families. So their volume of care is more, and they're able to charge less. If someone wants to say goodbye to a person, we certainly allow that without any additional charge. We don't mark up things. We try to keep things simple for everyone as we can. With burial, since we're talking costs, you're going to start at about $2,500 for the minimal funeral home and casket, and then you're probably $3,000 or $4,000 at the cemetery. You would want a plot. They have an open and closing of the grave, a liner that the casket fits in to protect it from the earth, and then a headstone. As I said, the veterans will pay for a veteran's headstone, but not the spouse in that case, unless it was in a national cemetery.
And does the plot have to have the liner?
Our cemeteries require a liner, and that is because it protects the casket from the weight of the earth. Plus we use heavy equipment to dig our graves, mowing with tractors. If you ever go into some old pioneer cemeteries, you'll see a grave that's sunken in. Well, that's because a liner wasn't used and the casket probably collapsed at some point. So we offer green burials where you would maybe have a shroud or a simple wicker casket or a wooden casket that lays on the earth. We still use the top of the liner for that reason, but that allows the grave not to be disturbed.
So green burials are allowed in Oregon, obviously?
Green burials are allowed in Oregon. We're not a green burial cemetery, but we offer that. We still use the top of the liner, which some cemeteries wouldn't use a liner at all in a green burial cemetery, but that would be the only requirement with ours. Since we're talking about green burial, embalming is done on occasion. It used to be a law that everyone was embalmed. In probably the early 80s, that changed because cremation was becoming more prevalent and people were being embalmed when it wasn't necessary. Embalming is used for like an open casket, preserving the body temporarily. It doesn't last forever. So embalming is less and less. We still will have burial of a casket without embalming or with embalming. It's up to the family to choose that, and we do that both ways. Roger, do you have anything you want to mention about cemeteries?
I think you've covered the basics of it. With the veteran's marker, they will provide the marker for the veteran in a private cemetery, although they do not pay for the base or the installation charges. And then they would reimburse the veteran $300 for a plot allowance. That's, so.
This pamphlet talks, I don't recall exactly what it says, but it has a veterans portion. And, oh yeah, it's a whole page on that, so.
Yeah.
I have a question about plots. So if you buy one and then discover you're going to move or something, the resale, how does that work? How do you?
Should I get up there?
Yeah.
Camera. So you can sell it.
Okay.
We don't buy them back per se. You can sell it through Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, newspaper, and we do that, I don't know, half a dozen times a year where people will come in and say, I bought this space from Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and so we'll look it up, make sure that they have, first of all, the right to sell it. If it was something that their parents had purchased, then we've got to have permissions from all of the living children. You know, so we make sure that it's good, that we protect the buyer that way. There is also an ACA transfer program. I'm not sure, do we participate with that?
We haven't for a long time.
Okay.
but-
So that could be available to where basically what it is say if you buy a space for $1,000 and you move back east and their spaces are $2,000, they're gonna give you a $500 discount and we're gonna send them a check for $500 and then you sign a quitclaim giving us back so you would get your $1,000 value, but then you would have to pay the difference.
Right.
So there is a way to work that. But, or if you decide to be cremated, you could have your cremated remains shipped and buried, so.
That was my other question. Do a lot of people bury their cremated remains?
I probably think probably 50%. I don't know. It's hard to say. It just depends on the area, you know. What we find a few times a year is where people have scattered. After a few years after they've done that, they don't have any place to go to see their loved one's name. And then they will come in and buy a marker of some sort, put in our cremation garden or something like that. I remember in Roseburg, I had a family, this older couple came in and they said, we want to buy a marker and put it on a grave out there. We want to buy the grave. Oh, and they said, we scattered our son up in the mountains and we put his marker up there and we're getting too old to hike in there. And we're going to go one last time and drag that granite marker down and then it'll be easier to come visiting here. And that's what they did.
So they bought a plot?
They bought a plot, didn't bury him, put his headstone there, and yeah, so, yeah.
So,
If it's legal, we'll do it.
so from a genealogy standpoint, I mean, with more people being cremated and not having markers, for instance,
It's gonna be a lost generation.
Right, you said there are enough records. Is that something they could access to find out information?
Well, if they're not on Find a Grave or something like that, they would have to have a copy of the death certificate to find out what funeral home was used.
True.
To actually, because I don't believe you can access, unless you're family, you can't access a death certificate through the state for 100 years.
Yeah, something like that.
It's like 100 years, you can't get it. They
Yeah,
won't give it to you.
So you're right, that is a whole chunk of people that are gonna be
They're gonna be
really
lost.
hard to
They're
find.
gonna be lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. So,
But you have the records of their cremation, but someone would just need to know to come to you to find it? Is that what you were saying?
That's a Tom question there, so.
Yes, so we keep permanent records of any person that passes away. So we have a file that we would be able to tell a family if someone was cremated and if someone picked up those ashes, or sometimes we will make a note scattered. If we know where they're scattered, sometimes we'll make a note just for the future.
As long as they go through.
Yeah, they'd have to call the funeral home to find out. And, we'd probably ask, well, who's calling, just out of respect.
Find out, yeah.
But usually it's not an issue. One thing, my father was cremated and he wanted to be scattered at the ocean, so we chose the trail on the cliffs out by Shore Acres, not in the park. So we did that as a family, and it always bothered me that his name wasn't somewhere. So at our Sunset Cemetery, we have a tower or a wall outside that's just a name plaque only. And so I have 5 spots reserved for my mother, my father, his name is there, my brother, my sister, myself, because we'll probably all end up at different places, but at some point all our names will be together. So that just made me feel better. Not everyone would want to do that.
And you said you have a cremation garden, is that what you said? So what?
Yes, so we have
what is that?
Roger, that would be a good question for you.
We've had a cremation garden since 1999, and there's all kinds of placements available for cremated remains. Some of them are sold out. We've got some plans in the future maybe to add when the time is right, but the most popular one is a brick niche wall. And they built a wall out of bricks with these little niches. It comes with the urn that fits perfect in there. We slide that in there, and it comes with a bronze nameplate, and we secure that on there, and none of them are high. They can all be touched. There's a sidewalk there, so if it's pouring down rain, you're not walking out in the mud. And yeah, it's a neat thing that those were done, and we could put a private columbarium in there for a family if they wanted to do that. I mean, it's all over the board what you could do, and there's all kinds of options for cremation placement. So.
It's such a change from, I mean, what a change you all have seen, you know, in just the traditional is a grave, and that's where you
Even
go.
still in the Bible Belt, there's still heavy burial,
Yeah.
you know, so.
When I started at the Coos Chapel when I was 16 in high school, and I came back 9 years later after mortuary school, but that was 30 years ago, and we had probably a funeral every day, sometimes two, with a casket and a burial, and now it's just totally changed. One thing I wanted to mention about burying cremated remains or the urn, so some people, a spouse had passed away some time ago, they were buried in a casket, and the second spouse decided later they want to be cremated, so that urn could be buried in the grave with a casket. And so that keeps the family together. That's another option.
And you're able to put a second headstone then, or how, oh, okay.
I kind of look at it, if there's room to put a headstone there, we'll do it, you know, so.
Yeah, we'd rather the family be together than have to buy a spot. We try to get as close as we can, and that makes sense.
But it sounds like if you really want to be together, you better buy them together, it sounds like, in order to really
Well,
ensure
that's-
that.
And this guide will help you make those decisions. It talks about things that we might not think about that are good. You can make your own notes, keep it in your desk. This would be a good thing not to put in the safety deposit box, but keep like with your important papers, files at home. And like I said, we'll make photocopies and keep a file at our funeral home, give you an ID card, whether you prepay or not. That way the records are there. That also allows if we die unexpectedly, which happens frequently, and we have a copy at the funeral home, we may be able to notify people that need to be notified where the authorities might not know who to call. I mean, eventually they'll find them, but this could help expedite some of those decisions and notification.
I have a question. My parents are buried in a mausoleum in San Diego, and if I get cremated and my ashes are put in the ocean, can they just write on the outside of their, where they're,
Are their names engraved, or is it bronze?
I think it's like bronze, I'm not sure.
So the thing to do would be to call that cemetery and ask them. And what I tell people is if they say yes, say, how can I pay for it? Because once it's on a contract, they can't back out.
Okay, because
That's what I say.
Yeah.
Because they might tell you yes today, and then you speak to somebody in 30 years, and they'll say, oh, no, we can't do that.
Okay.
Put it on a contract.
Okay.
Then they have to honor it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. You know, going back to the safety deposit box, I was thinking that when my father-in-law passed away, he had everything in a trust. And my sister-in-law, who was the executor, went down to the bank to withdraw some money out of his account because it was owned by the trust, and they turned her down. You don't have a death certificate, you need to go to the court and file a small estate affidavit. So she had to wait till she could get in. Yeah, so it's, like Tom said, it's not a good place to put stuff like that because you at least can't even get into it till you have a death certificate, and that could take a few weeks sometimes.
Oh, does it? Does it take that long?
Yeah, what's your normal time now? waiting.
The death certificate kind of depends upon the doctor that's signing and also when we get all of the information to complete it. So typically you're within a week, but there are times where there's delays, 2 weeks maybe. Unusual circumstance would be more than that, but that would be unusual. And death certificates are available in our county for up to 6 months after our death, and then they're available indefinitely through the state of Oregon. So birth certificates and death certificates can be ordered through the state at any time from years ago. But like we were talking, you have to describe who you are and why you need it and how your relationship is. They don't release them to everyone.
Yeah, so, any other questions?
So I'm just curious, if you are, if it's your first one you're planning, for instance, and you don't know, I'm just looking at your list here, these instructions. If you don't know, if they don't particularly attend a certain church, and if you don't know anything food-wise, flour-wise, all that stuff, how do you even start?
So that's a good question. Some people just fill out the basic information for their family and just make a note, let my family decide. Some people are very detail oriented and want everything in complete order. Some people are less detail oriented and carefree, and so those are just things to help. And if you could put a line through it if that's not something you would want to do.
But I'm assuming you, like for instance, you will have tons of contacts that would help.
Yeah,
like
we assist.
Family members.
We assist if we have a memorial service or a funeral. If the family doesn't have a church family or a minister, that's sometimes how Trevor, he acts as one of our chaplains. He can help us have a memorial. A lot of people don't attend church right now, or they used to. But we can assist with the death certificate, Social Security, veterans, flowers, minister, music, newspaper, catering, it might not be at our funeral home, we can help recommend somewhere else to have a funeral. Some people want to have a party instead of a funeral. That sounds more like my style. Everybody's different.
I remember my grandparents, when my grandma passed away back in '87, she had everything, what hymns, what kind of flowers, everything. The only thing that Grandma and Grandma didn't do was pay for it. There's money in the bank to take care of it. When Grandpa passed away in '92, they had World War II bonds in their safe deposit box that they never cashed in. So that's how they paid for Grandpa's care and the Alzheimer's unit and his funeral and all of that. But they didn't care what it cost. There's money in the bank to pay for it. But they had it all detailed out.
I was thinking I would recommend, and so would you, to anyone here today, talk to your family about these kind of things. I know it's kind of a taboo subject.
Yeah.
We don't want to talk about death and whatnot. As a pastor, I know a majority of what my church members have asked for simply because they've talked to me about it. So it would help kind of mitigate, I don't know what mom wants. Talk about it. Make those kind of determinations pre-planned.
Big thing too is people like to save money. So when you prepay at today's cost, it freezes the cost on just about everything. Flowers, the obituary, things like that. We can't, you can put money in for those things, but you can't freeze the cost on those. But casket services and all of that stuff, you can freeze it. And so that way when the kids walk in, the arrangement, Tom can attest, when you sit down with a pre-arrangement, somebody that's pre-arranged, they passed away, Tom's going to have just about everything done before the family even gets there, and then he goes over everything. And instead of it being an hour and a half meeting, it's 20 minutes. Or sometimes even over the phone you do. It's just so much easier for the family. And it really is a true gift of love. It really is.
When we have a death, it's one of our, we're just so happy to go back to the funeral home and find a file with this, because it just makes our job easier, it makes the family easier. Whether they paid for it or not, we know that we've got some instructions to follow, so.
Yeah, it's not the best time to be making decisions probably, so it's easier all around, I imagine.
Yeah.
Tom and I worked for the same corporation years ago. I worked in Roseburg, and he was over here, and we had these planning guides, you know. People would say, well, where do we keep these if we can't keep them in safe deposit box? Where do we keep them? And I was on the sales side back in those days, and they taught us to tell people, if you don't have a fireproof box that your kids can get into, put it in a Ziploc bag and in your freezer. If your house catches on fire, it will not burn in there.
Always check the freezer, I've heard.
Yeah.
And I went out to an appointment one day and talked to this guy. He just wanted to update his file. He says, you know, I've got that planning guide. I've got it in the freezer, just like you guys told me. So he went and got it, took it out of the bag, and I went to look at it. I was going to update his information. He hadn't filled nothing out. And I looked at him and I said, do me a favor, just throw this away. And he says, why? I said, you haven't filled it out. You haven't written your name in it. He says, well, you know, and I says, don't show it to your kids. Don't show it to them to think that you thought about it. You know? So hopefully he started. I said, and I got him started. I said, let's fill out some stuff here. You know? But I'll never forget that. He had it in the freezer. It wasn't filled
Did what he
out.
was told, so.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, one of the questions I even get a lot is how does a death notification in the paper happen? How do you?
Okay, that's a good question. So we help the family in submitting a death notice or obituary to the paper. It can be our local paper, The World, we use the Shopper in The World, or we can help an out-of-town paper. Some people relocate here. So nothing in our papers is required. Some people think it has to be in a death notice, but that's an option to the family. So we always ask if they want a notice of death in the paper. Sometimes they don't immediately. You know, there might be a spouse that's alone. A house might be empty for a while. So we're careful to determine if and when to put that in the paper. And then we have a website now that will put death and obituary notices, and a lot of people are doing online now, and so out-of-town people can view an obituary and send a condolence or send flowers. So that's been a nice thing with technology.
With technology, are you able to live stream a funeral?
So we have not done live stream yet.
Okay.
We will eventually do that, but we haven't. Usually we have it recorded, or a family member will use their phone, live time, or whatever you call that.
If the church hosts a funeral, I will usually ask the family if they want to do that. We just had a Memorial Saturday and it was live streamed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking with the way, hey, we
Right.
have technology with family everywhere anymore.
Not only that, but then you're able to go in and save and have it
Yeah.
forever, you know, so.
We aren't having a lot of services at our funeral home. That's probably why we haven't got to that point yet, like we used to. But it's in the works.
And sometimes they'll create a group of people that can't come in their Messenger or Facebook.
Right, yeah.
And then when somebody will come and then go live to that group so they can log in
Yeah.
and see it. So there is a way.
Mhm.
You know, so.
Well, thank you for attending today, and the viewers. If you have any questions, please call us anytime. If you'd like a packet, just give us a call. We'll mail you one or stop by. And we appreciate being here.
Thank you. This is good information to have.
Yes.
Thank you very much.